Hey there, welcome to Broaderos. Tonight, we've got hours of chilling horror stories combined with soothing rain sounds to help you relax and sleep. Before you drift off, leave a comment below and let us know where you're listening from and what time it is. And don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe right away. If you end up not enjoying it, you can always take it back later. Get cozy and let the fear take over. Midnight Visitor. Have you ever felt a sense of dread creeping over you as the clock strikes 12? I never believed in the supernatural until I experienced it firsthand. My name is Jake, and I live alone in a modest 2-bedroom apartment on the outskirts of town. My life was fairly ordinary: work, eat, sleep, repeat. But everything changed when the midnight visitor arrived. It started a few weeks ago. At first, it was just a soft knock at the door. I brushed it off as a figment of my imagination, a leftover remnant of the day's stress. Who would knock on my door at midnight, anyway? But as the nights wore on, the knocking became more persistent, almost like a rhythm echoing in the stillness of the night. On that particular night, the air felt different, thicker, charged with an electric anticipation. I was lying in bed, the covers pulled tightly around me, trying to drown out the thoughts that plagued my mind. My eyes flickered to the clock on the wall, its hands moving ever closer to midnight. Just as I began to doze off, I heard it, the familiar knock, sharp and clear, resonating through the silence of my apartment. Just ignore it, I whispered to myself. But something deep inside urged me to get up and check. Was it my neighbor? A friend playing a late-night prank? I swung my legs out of bed and felt the chill of the wooden floor against my feet. My heart raced as I crept toward the door, each step feeling heavier than the last. The dim light from the hallway flickered like a warning, casting eerie shadows that danced along the walls. "Hello?" I called out hesitantly, my voice trembling in the stillness. There was no response, just the faint sound of my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. I reached for the doorknob, my hand hovering just above it as I hesitated. What if it was someone in trouble? Or worse, what if it was something I wasn't prepared to face? With a deep breath, I twisted the knob and pulled the door open, bracing myself for whatever lay beyond. But there was nothing. Just the empty hallway stretching out before me, dimly lit and utterly silent. My heart sank, a wave of disappointment crashing over me. I stepped outside, peering into the darkness. The flickering overhead lights cast long shadows, and for a moment, I felt as though I was being watched. "Is anyone there?" I called again, my voice now tinged with confusion. The silence that followed was deafening, wrapping around me like a thick fog. I stood there for a moment, the chill of the night creeping into my bones, before retreating back into my apartment. I closed the door, locking it behind me, a sense of unease settling into the pit of my stomach. Maybe it was just my imagination. But as the days turned into weeks, the nightly knocking persisted, each sound a reminder of something lurking just out of sight. It became a ritual. Each night at midnight, I would find myself awake, waiting for the knock, my heart pounding in anticipation. And each time I opened the door, there was nothing but the empty hallway staring back at me. The nights grew longer, and I found myself spiraling into a cycle of anxiety. I started to dread the approach of midnight. The walls of my apartment, once a sanctuary, now felt like a prison, closing in around me with every knock. I stopped inviting friends over, avoiding social interactions that could distract me from the growing dread. Tonight was different, though. I could feel it in the air, a tension that buzzed like static electricity. As I lay in bed, I knew deep down that something was coming. The clock ticked steadily toward midnight, and I could feel my heart race in rhythm with the seconds. What was waiting for me behind that door? Have you ever felt an uneasy chill creeping up your spine, even when you know you're alone? I remember that feeling all too well. Every night at precisely midnight, a knock would echo through my home. It was a rhythmic, almost calculated sound resonating through the stillness of the night. At first, I brushed it off as the wind or the settling of the old house. After all, my home was over a century old, creaking and groaning like a living being. But as the nights turned into weeks, my casual dismissal faded, replaced by a growing unease. Each time the clock struck 12, a knot tightened in my stomach. I began to wonder who, or what, was on the other side of my door. One night, the knock came louder than ever, reverberating against the wooden frame of my front door. My heart raced as I sat up in bed, clutching my sheets. I glanced at the clock, its hands glimmering ominously in the darkness. Midnight. It felt as if the air itself had thickened, wrapping around me in a suffocating embrace. The first few times, I had dared to call out, "Hello? Is anyone there?" But each time, my voice echoed back to me, met with the silence of the night. It felt as though whatever was out there was toying with me, waiting for the moment I would open the door. But what lay beyond was a mystery that gnawed at my thoughts, leaving me trapped in a cycle of fear and curiosity. I had lived alone in that old house for years, yet the sense of isolation grew heavier with each passing knock. My friends would often joke about how it was the house's way of introducing itself, but I knew better. There was something sinister about the midnight visitor. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that I was not as alone as I believed. One fateful night, my curiosity got the better of me. I had resolved to confront whatever, or whoever, was making the sound. I slipped out of bed, the cold wooden floor sending chills through my feet. With each step toward the door, my heart thudded in my chest, louder than the knocks that echoed through my mind. As I approached the door, the knocking stopped abruptly. I paused, my hand hovering over the doorknob, doubt creeping in. Perhaps it was just my imagination, a trick of the dark. But then, in the silence, I heard it, a whisper, faint yet distinct, as if someone were standing right outside, breathing just inches away from me. "Let me in." The voice was chilling, like ice skimming over my skin. In that moment, I froze, caught between instinct and intrigue. I had to know what was happening. I had to know who or what was on the other side of that door. Summoning every ounce of courage, I turned the knob and pulled the door open, heart racing, breath held. But the night greeted me with nothing but darkness and emptiness. The porch was devoid of life, the air thick with an unsettling stillness. I stepped outside, scanning the shadows. "Hello?" I called out, my voice wavering in the quiet night. But the only response was the faint rustle of leaves swaying in the breeze, mocking my foolishness. I took a deep breath, preparing to retreat back into my house when I noticed something unusual at the edge of my porch. A small, crumpled piece of paper lay against the railing. It looked as if it had been there for some time, weathered and worn. My heart raced as I bent down to pick it up, a sense of dread washing over me. Opening the paper, I squinted to read the hastily scrawled message. "They are watching. Do not let them in." A chill ran down my spine. My eyes darted around the yard, the shadows seeming to thicken and swirl in response. I backed away slowly, the weight of the warning settling over me like a shroud. I could feel my pulse in my ears, a rapid thumping echoing the fear clawing at my insides. Just then, the clock struck one. Bang! The sound rang out, loud and jarring, pulling me from my thoughts. My instincts kicked in, and I hurriedly closed the door, locking it tight. The darkness beyond felt like it was pressing against the walls of my home, eager to seep inside. I leaned against the door, breathless, my mind racing as I tried to process what had just happened. The knocks had escalated, the message had been a warning, and now I felt more trapped than ever. That night, sleep evaded me like a phantom in the dark. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, haunted by the warning I had found. The words echoed in my mind, "They are watching. Do not let them in." What did it mean? Who was watching? And why was I the one being targeted? The questions spiraled through my thoughts, fueling a rising tide of paranoia. The following night, I was determined to stay vigilant. I set my phone alarm for midnight, positioning it on my bedside table as a grim reminder. As the clock crept closer to that ominous hour, I felt a mix of dread and anticipation. I couldn't let fear control me. I needed to face whatever was happening. As the clock struck 12, my heart began to race. Silence enveloped my home like a heavy blanket, yet a tension crackled in the air, an electric charge that made every nerve in my body stand on edge. The first knock came, soft yet distinct, reverberating through the stillness. I sat up slowly, the familiar knot tightening in my stomach. The second knock followed, firmer this time, as if something was testing my resolve. I took a deep breath, fighting the instinct to hide under my covers. I had to confront this once and for all. I got out of bed and padded toward the door, each step feeling heavier than the last. I could feel the shadows clinging to the corners of the room, watching, waiting. My hand trembled slightly as I reached for the doorknob. I could hear my heartbeat in my ears, louder than the knocks that had become a nightly ritual. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice shaky yet defiant. The only response was a chilling silence that seemed to stretch on for eternity. I hesitated, fear coiling in my chest, but I had come too far to turn back now. With a swift motion, I flung the door open, ready to face my midnight visitor. The porch lay empty, just as it had the night before. But something felt different this time. The air was thick with an unsettling presence, a feeling that I was not as alone as I had believed. Then, from the corner of my eye, I caught a glimpse of movement. A shadow flitted past the edge of my yard, a dark shape darting between the trees. My pulse quickened as I squinted into the darkness, my mind racing with thoughts of what it could be. I stepped forward cautiously, my heart pounding in my chest, driven by a mix of fear and curiosity. "Hello?" I called out again, my voice barely above a whisper. I felt like a fool, talking to the void, but there was something compelling me to press on. The wind rustled the leaves, creating a whispering chorus that echoed through the night. Just then, the sound of a child's laughter pierced the silence. It was innocent yet dissonant, sending chills down my spine. I turned toward the sound, my breath hitching in my throat. "Is someone there?" I shouted, trying to sound braver than I felt. The laughter faded into a soft giggle, like the memory of a fleeting dream, and for a moment, I felt a spark of hope. But that hope shattered when I caught sight of the figure standing at the edge of the shadows. It was small and indistinct, just out of reach of the porch light. My heart raced as I squinted, trying to make out the features of the child, but the darkness obscured everything. "What do you want?" I demanded, the tremor in my voice betraying my fear. The figure stepped closer, and I could see the glint of eyes reflecting the light, a luminous, hollow stare that sent a wave of dread crashing over me. The child raised a hand, and I felt an icy grip of fear seize my heart. "Let me in," the voice called, sweet yet unnervingly melodic. I took a step back, confusion mingling with terror. This was not just a simple encounter, it was something far more sinister. No, I replied firmly, closing the door partially, my instinct screaming at me to retreat. Suddenly, the child's expression twisted, and I was met with a visage that was anything but innocent. The eyes morphed into something dark and hollow, and the sweet laughter transformed into an eerie cackle. "You cannot escape," it hissed, the voice echoing in the night. Panic surged within me, and I slammed the door shut, locking it with trembling hands. I pressed my back against it, breathing heavily as my heart raced. The darkness outside felt alive, pulsating with a malevolent energy. What was happening? Was this some cruel game? The warning from the paper rang in my mind, "Do not let them in." I couldn't shake the feeling that this child, this thing, was more than just a mere specter. It was a harbinger of something darker, a gateway to a reality I wasn't prepared to face. I stumbled back into the living room, my mind racing, desperate for answers. But the only thing that was clear was that I had to find a way to protect myself from whatever was lurking outside, whatever had decided that midnight was the perfect time to pay me a visit. As I sat on the couch, adrenaline coursing through my veins, I heard it again. The knock. The knock came again, softer this time, almost tentative. It was a sound I had come to dread, yet a part of me was compelled to understand what lay behind it. My heart raced as I fought the urge to run, to escape the suffocating grip of fear that held me captive in my own home. I needed answers, but I also needed to survive. Gathering my courage, I edged closer to the door once more, my fingers lingering on the cold doorknob. This time, I didn't just want to confront the entity, I needed to demand an explanation. What did it want? Why was it tormenting me? The questions buzzed in my head like a swarm of angry bees, relentless and unyielding. "Who are you?" I called out, my voice steadier than before. "What do you want from me?" The silence that followed was deafening, as if the world had paused, holding its breath in anticipation. Then, a soft, lilting voice replied, "I just want to play." The innocent tone was almost mocking, wrapping around my anxiety like a vice. "Don't you want to play with me?" "No," I shouted, my fear boiling over into anger. "I don't want to play." The laughter that followed was high-pitched and cruel, echoing eerily in the dark. "But you have to. It's the only way." I recoiled from the door, my mind racing. The only way for what? My instinct screamed that something was terribly wrong, that I was teetering on the edge of a precipice with no safety net below. Desperate to escape this twisted game, I glanced around my living room for anything that might help shield me from whatever malevolent force was at play. My eyes landed on my phone, still illuminating the darkness, its screen showing the time, 12:05. Panic flared in my chest. I had to keep it close. It was my lifeline to the outside world. With trembling hands, I grabbed my phone, ready to call for help. But as I pressed the button, the call screen flickered and turned to static. I cursed under my breath, my fingers fumbling with the device. It felt as though the very air in the room had thickened, pressing in on me like an invisible weight. "Help!" I cried out again, more fervently this time. "Someone, please." But the shadows answered only with silence. As the static subsided, the familiar knocking returned, but this time it was louder, more insistent. I could feel the walls of my home close in around me, suffocating my sense of security. The voice grew louder, more demanding. "Let me in." I backed away from the door, my heart hammering wildly in my chest. In my panic, I stumbled and fell against the coffee table, knocking over a lamp. The crash shattered the tense silence, sending shards of light scattering across the room. "Don't you want to see me?" the voice cooed. "I can show you things." "I don't want to see anything," I shouted back, scrambling to my feet. But there was a part of me that was curious, a flicker of intrigue amidst the fear. I was losing my grip on reality, and the shadows were dancing around me, whispering secrets I was too afraid to uncover. Suddenly, the lights flickered, plunging the room into darkness for a heartbeat before they surged back to life. My heart sank as I saw it, just for a moment, a fleeting shadow darting across the wall. I lunged for the door, flinging it open, ready to confront the specter head-on. But again, there was nothing. Just the vast emptiness of the night, stretching out before me like a gaping maw. I stepped outside, drawn by an invisible thread of urgency, my mind racing with every possible explanation. The air felt thick with tension, and I turned in circles, scanning the perimeter of my property. The trees loomed ominously, their branches twisting like skeletal fingers against the moonlit sky. I could feel the weight of unseen eyes on me, pressing down with a palpable intensity. "Show yourself," I demanded, my voice trembling yet defiant. "If you're here, then show me what you want." For a brief moment, silence reigned, and I thought perhaps my bravery had made a difference. Then, a cold wind swept through the yard, and with it came a cacophony of laughter, chilling and high-pitched, swirling around me like a cyclone. Suddenly, I felt a tug at my heart, a sensation that something was pulling me deeper into the darkness. I stumbled back, my pulse quickening as I felt the presence growing stronger. My breath quickened. I was in over my head. "Come play with me." The voice was now a chorus of distorted laughter, echoing from every direction. It felt as if the shadows themselves were alive, encircling me, eager to pull me into their depths. I turned and fled back inside, slamming the door shut and locking it with a frantic urgency. I pressed my back against it, trying to catch my breath. My heart raced as I stood there in the dim light, every instinct screaming that I was not safe. But as I sank to the floor, the realization hit me hard. I was trapped in a cycle, a relentless loop of dread that threatened to consume me whole. I couldn't escape, no matter how hard I tried. I needed to find a way to break free, to outsmart whatever was lurking in the dark. The child's laughter echoed in my mind, a haunting reminder that I was not alone. The game had only just begun, and I was its unwilling participant. As I sat huddled against the door, my mind raced with thoughts of escape. The presence outside felt like a living entity, whispering promises of chaos and darkness. I couldn't let it take me. I had to break the cycle. I needed a plan. I glanced around the room, searching for anything that might help me fight back. My gaze landed on the heavy coffee table, still partially knocked over from my earlier stumble. It was solid, sturdy, and could serve as a barricade or weapon. I forced myself to my feet, the adrenaline coursing through my veins propelling me forward. Just then, the knocking returned, a steady rhythm that sent jolts of fear through my body. "Let me in," the voice called, its tone now dripping with impatience. "Go away," I shouted, my voice cracking under the strain of my fear. "You're not welcome here." The laughter erupted again, a chilling sound that echoed through the room, making my skin crawl. "You can't keep me out forever. I know your secrets, your fears. I know you." The walls felt like they were closing in, and I had to remind myself to breathe. I focused on the coffee table, flipping it upright. It was heavy, but I managed to slide it against the door, creating a makeshift barricade. "Don't think this will save you," the voice taunted, a sinister undertone creeping into its tone. I glanced at the phone again. The time read 12:15. My heart sank. I realized I had mere minutes before the unknown terror would either find a way in or force me to confront it. I had to gather my thoughts and figure out what to do. In a moment of clarity, I remembered my journal. I had started writing about the experiences leading up to this night, trying to make sense of the strange occurrences. Maybe there was something I had overlooked, some connection that could provide insight into the presence tormenting me. I dashed to my bedroom, grabbing the leather-bound journal from my nightstand. As I flipped through the pages, the words blurred together in a dizzying array of fear and confusion. But then I stumbled upon a passage I had written just days before about an old tale my grandmother had told me of a spirit that preyed on the lonely, drawing them into its world. The words leaped out at me, and I felt a shiver run down my spine. The more you resist, the stronger it becomes, I read aloud, my voice barely above a whisper. Suddenly, the knocking resumed, louder and more forceful. "Let me in. You can't hide from me." In that moment, I understood the nature of the game I was caught in. The spirit was feeding on my fear, my isolation. I realized that I had to confront it, to face the darkness head-on. With renewed determination, I returned to the living room, holding the journal tightly. "If you want me to play," I called out, "then let's play. But I won't be afraid anymore." The laughter ceased abruptly, replaced by a tense silence that enveloped the room. "What do you mean?" the voice queried, curiosity creeping into its tone. "I'm not playing your game of fear. I refuse to let you control me," I declared, feeling a flicker of power within myself. The door rattled violently, the weight of the presence bearing down on it as if trying to force its way inside. "You think you can resist me?" "I don't just think, I know I can," I shot back, steeling myself against the growing dread. As the voice seethed, the temperature in the room plummeted, my breath visible in the air. I could feel the darkness coiling around me like a serpent, trying to crush my resolve. But I focused on the journal, drawing strength from the words that had been my companion in this nightmare. "Your strength comes from the fear of the unknown," I declared, my voice trembling yet resolute. "But I will no longer give you that power over me." Suddenly, a blinding light filled the room, illuminating the corners that had been shrouded in darkness. The shadows shrieked and writhed, as if they were being burned away by the brightness. I shielded my eyes, gasping at the intensity of it. "No! You can't do this," the voice shrieked, now filled with rage. "You must obey." "I will not obey," I shouted defiantly, clutching the journal to my chest. "You have no hold over me." The light intensified, and I felt a force pulling me forward, towards the door. The presence swirled around me, trying to snuff out the light, but I pushed back with every ounce of strength I had. I could feel the darkness weakening, its grip loosening as I faced it head-on. Then, in a burst of clarity, I opened the journal and began to read aloud. "To those who dwell in shadows, I cast you out. You have no claim over my life." With each word, the light grew brighter, pushing the darkness further away. The knocking stopped, replaced by a deafening silence that enveloped me. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, everything went still. I felt a wave of exhaustion wash over me, my body trembling from the emotional battle. I slowly opened my eyes, half expecting the darkness to return, but it was gone. The room was illuminated, a soft glow replacing the malevolent shadows that had haunted me for so long. But just as I began to feel a sense of relief, the silence was broken by a final whisper, a chilling reminder that while I had won this battle, the war was far from over. "You may have escaped this time, but I'll be back." The words hung in the air, a sinister promise that echoed in my mind. I had faced my fear, but the darkness had not been vanquished. It was still lurking, waiting for the moment when I would let my guard down. As I sank to the floor, the reality of my situation hit me. I had survived the night, but the battle with the unknown was only just beginning. The game was not over. And as the clock struck 12 once again, I knew that the midnight visitor would always be a part of me, a haunting reminder of the darkness that lay just beyond the door. The creeping silence. Have you ever been alone in a house so quiet that you start hearing things? It's strange how silence can be more unsettling than noise. Growing up, I'd always imagined silence as peaceful, something soothing, like a retreat from the chaos of the outside world. But that night, it was the silence itself that made my skin crawl. And it wasn't the usual quiet, the kind you get late at night after the hum of the city dies down or the wind outside stills. No, this silence was thick, oppressive, as if the air around me had stopped moving altogether. It began, innocuously enough, on a Thursday night. I had just returned from a long day at work and was looking forward to some peace and quiet. My job had been particularly grueling that day, endless meetings, calls, the usual grind. I kicked off my shoes, tossed my bag on the couch, and sank into the cushions, letting out a deep sigh of relief. The house was still, like it always was when I got home, but something felt different. For one, it felt colder than usual, despite the thermostat showing a comfortable 72 degrees. I dismissed it, thinking I was just tired, and headed to the kitchen for a glass of water. As I stood at the counter, sipping, I glanced at the clock. 11:30. Not quite midnight, but close enough to that witching hour when your mind starts playing tricks on you. You know the feeling, right? When shadows seem to lengthen just a little too much, and the corners of your vision pick up things that aren't there. That's when I first noticed it, the silence. The refrigerator wasn't humming. No creaking of the house settling, no distant murmur of cars passing by outside, not even the faint ticking of the wall clock. It was as if every sound in the world had been vacuumed out. I set the glass down, listening harder, trying to catch anything at all. But there was nothing. I tried to brush off the unease creeping up my spine, telling myself I was being ridiculous. I had been working too hard, was overtired, and my brain was just playing tricks on me. But still, that silence. It gnawed at me, growing heavier by the second. I headed upstairs to my bedroom, figuring that some sleep would shake off whatever weird funk I was in. The stairs creaked under my weight as I ascended, but the sound felt muted, as if even the house was trying to remain quiet. When I reached the top, I paused for a moment, listening again. Still nothing. With a sigh, I made my way to the bathroom to wash up. The reflection staring back at me from the mirror looked as drained as I felt, dark circles under my eyes, hair messier than usual. I splashed cold water on my face, hoping it would shake off the growing sense of unease. But as I dried my face, I saw something in the mirror that made my stomach drop. Behind me, just outside the bathroom door, there was a shadow. I froze, heart pounding in my chest, eyes fixed on the mirror. The shadow didn't move. It just lingered there. I turned around quickly, but there was nothing. The hallway was empty. Get a grip, I muttered to myself. You're imagining things. But the silence had deepened again, pressing down on me like a heavy blanket. I hurriedly brushed my teeth, avoiding looking into the mirror any longer than I had to. When I finally climbed into bed, I pulled the covers up to my chin, feeling a ridiculous urge to hide. It reminded me of being a child again, when hiding under the blankets made me feel safe from the monsters in the dark. I lay there, eyes wide open, staring at the ceiling. My heart rate had slowed, but that eerie quiet still lingered. And then, just as I started to drift off, I heard it, a faint creak, like a door slowly opening. Every muscle in my body tensed. I held my breath, straining to hear, but the creak had stopped. Silence again. But this time, it wasn't empty. I could feel something, like the air had shifted. It was as though I wasn't alone anymore. I sat up in bed, scanning the room, my heart racing. Nothing seemed out of place. I listened intently, waiting for another sound, but all I heard was that heavy, suffocating silence. Unable to shake the feeling that I was being watched, I got up and checked the doors and windows, making sure everything was locked. It was. Still, the feeling persisted. As I walked back to bed, I noticed something odd. The hallway seemed darker than usual, like the shadows had thickened somehow. My breath caught in my throat. Had I left a light on somewhere? I couldn't remember. Then I saw it. At the far end of the hallway, near the stairs, there was a figure, tall, indistinct, just standing there, bathed in shadow. My first instinct was to flip on the light, but my hand froze. Something told me that if I did, it would be gone before the light even flickered on. We stood there, locked in place. Me, in the middle of the hallway, and it, whatever it was, at the end. The silence between us was almost deafening. I wanted to move, to run, but my feet felt glued to the floor. The figure didn't move. It didn't make a sound, but its presence was undeniable, like a weight pressing down on the room. I tried to call out, but my throat was dry, and my voice came out as a hoarse whisper. "Who's there?" No response. Just silence. I slowly took a step back, not daring to take my eyes off it. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Was it a trick of the light? My tired brain playing games? But as I stepped back, the figure seemed to shift, just slightly, as if it was acknowledging my movement. That's when I turned and bolted into my bedroom, slamming the door shut behind me. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I grabbed my phone from the bedside table, fumbling to turn on the flashlight. The small beam cut through the darkness, but my shaking hands made it difficult to focus on anything. I pressed my ear against the door, listening. Silence. I didn't know whether to be relieved or terrified. I stood there, my back pressed against the door, phone in hand, trying to control my breathing. My mind was racing. Had I really seen something, or was I just exhausted and paranoid? But the weight of that silence, it was still there, filling the room like a thick fog. The kind of silence that makes your skin crawl, as if something is just out of sight, waiting. I glanced around the room, the flashlight beam sweeping across the furniture. Nothing seemed out of place, but the shadows felt darker, heavier. My eyes flickered to the window. Outside, the streetlights cast long, eerie shadows across the yard. It looked normal enough, but I couldn't shake the feeling that if I stared long enough, I'd see something, someone, standing out there, watching. I had to do something. I couldn't just stand here, frozen in fear. My mind raced with options: call someone, leave the house, do anything to break this awful tension. But deep down, I knew I wasn't ready to step back out into that hallway. Not yet. I grabbed my phone and dialed my best friend, Greg. He always had a way of calming me down, making things feel a little less terrifying. The phone rang once, twice, then silence. I looked at the screen, no service. My heart sank. No, 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 I muttered, staring at the phone as if I could will it to work. I was in the city. There was always service here. Why now, of all times, was it gone? I tried again, but the screen remained stubbornly blank, No bars, no connection. Suddenly, there was a faint creaking sound, barely audible, but unmistakable. It was coming from outside my bedroom door. My breath caught in my throat. It was subtle, almost like the sound of weight shifting on old floorboards. I strained to listen, the phone still clenched tightly in my hand, as if it could protect me. Creak. There it was again, but this time closer, just outside the door. My heart was hammering in my chest, and every nerve in my body was screaming to run, but where? I couldn't stay here, paralyzed with fear, waiting for whatever was on the other side to find me. I had to face it. With a deep breath, I slowly reached for the doorknob, hand shaking. My fingers brushed against the cold metal, and I hesitated, every instinct telling me to stop. But I couldn't live with myself if I just stood here, waiting. Slowly, I turned the knob, pushing the door open just a crack. The hallway was pitch black. The flashlight's beam wavered as I scanned the darkness, searching for any sign of movement. Nothing. But that same oppressive silence hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Cautiously, I stepped into the hallway, every sense on high alert. The figure, if it had been real, was gone, but the memory of it sent chills down my spine. I moved slowly, making my way toward the stairs, heart thudding in my ears. As I reached the top step, I heard it again. A soft, almost imperceptible sound. Not the creaking this time, something else. Like a whisper. My pulse quickened, and I froze, trying to locate where it was coming from. It sounded distant, muffled, as if it were coming from deep within the walls. I leaned closer, straining to hear. And then, clear this time, I heard it, my name. David. A cold sweat broke out on the back of my neck. My breath came in short, sharp gasps. I backed away from the stairs, eyes wide, scanning the dark hallway. There was no one there, but the voice had been unmistakable. It sounded close, too close. Like it had come from right behind me. I spun around, pointing the flashlight wildly, but the hallway remained empty. The walls seemed to close in on me, the silence pressing down, suffocating. I had to get out. Now. I bolted down the stairs, nearly tripping in my haste, and rushed to the front door. My hands fumbled with the lock, and for a terrifying second, I thought it wouldn't open. But finally, the door gave way, and I burst out into the night. The cold air hit me like a slap to the face. I stood there on the front porch, gasping for breath, staring back at the house. It loomed over me, dark and silent, as if mocking my fear. The rational part of my brain told me to keep running, to get as far away from here as possible. But something was pulling me back. The silence. It was still there, lingering in the air around the house, almost as if it was alive. It wasn't just the absence of sound anymore, it was a presence. And it was watching me. I had to know. I had to understand what was happening. Against every instinct, I stepped back toward the house, heart pounding in my chest. I couldn't explain it, but I felt drawn to it, like some invisible force was pulling me back inside. I walked through the door, the cold air behind me feeling like a distant memory as the heavy silence wrapped around me once more. The house felt different now. Darker, more oppressive. And then I heard it again, the whisper, clear this time. David. I swallowed hard, turning slowly toward the voice. It was coming from the living room. Trembling, I stepped forward, the flashlight flickering in my hand. I knew I was walking straight into whatever was waiting for me, but I couldn't stop. The silence was louder now, almost deafening, and with every step, I could feel something growing closer. And then, in the middle of the living room, I saw it. A shadow. No, not just a shadow. Something darker, deeper, moving slowly toward me. Its shape was indistinct, but the malice emanating from it was unmistakable. I wanted to scream, to run, but I couldn't. My legs refused to move, my voice caught in my throat. The silence swallowed me whole, and all I could do was watch as it crept closer, inch by inch, until it was right in front of me. I opened my mouth to speak, but no sound came out. The last thing I felt before the darkness consumed me was the cold, suffocating silence pressing down on my chest, stealing the very breath from my lungs. The last thing I heard was my name, whispered one final time. And then, nothing. The darkness enveloped me completely. I couldn't move, couldn't see, couldn't think beyond the primal fear that gripped my chest. There was nothing, no sound, no light, no air. Only the suffocating silence, pressing down on me from all sides like an unseen weight. I tried to scream again, but my throat felt frozen, as if the very act of making a sound was impossible in this place. I was trapped in a void, an empty space where even my thoughts seemed to echo back in on themselves, muffled and distorted. Was I dead? Had that thing, whatever it was, taken me somewhere beyond this world? My mind reeled as I tried to grasp at anything, any memory, any thread of logic that could explain what was happening. But there was nothing to hold on to. Just the overwhelming, all-consuming quiet. Time didn't exist here. I don't know how long I stayed like that. Minutes, hours, days? It was impossible to tell. All I knew was that the longer I stayed, the more the silence began to worm its way into my thoughts, unraveling my sense of self. It felt like it was trying to erase me, piece by piece. But then, just as I thought I would lose myself completely, I heard it again. A faint sound, so distant and fragile it was almost like a hallucination. My name. David. It was soft, barely a whisper, but it shattered the oppressive quiet like a stone thrown into still water. My heart raced in my chest as I strained to hear it again, desperate for any sign of life, any break in the terrible silence. David. This time it was closer, more distinct. I wasn't imagining it. Someone, something, was calling to me. I tried to speak, to answer, but my voice still refused to come. Instead, I focused all my will on moving, on forcing my body to respond. I had to find the source of the voice. It was the only anchor I had left. Slowly, painfully, I managed to move my arms, my legs. It felt like pushing through thick, invisible mud, but inch by inch, I began to pull myself forward, toward the voice. The further I moved, the more the silence seemed to loosen its grip on me. Sound began to return, first, just the faint echo of my own heartbeat in my ears, then the soft shuffle of my feet on the floor, and finally the creak of old floorboards beneath me. It was still faint, but it was there, like I was slowly waking up from a deep, oppressive sleep. And then, without warning, the silence broke completely. The sound hit me all at once, sharp and jarring after so much quiet. It wasn't a voice this time, but something far more tangible. A loud, echoing bang that reverberated through the air like the slam of a heavy door. I froze, heart pounding in my chest. Where had it come from? My eyes darted around, trying to locate the source of the noise, but the room was still as dark as ever, the flashlight flickering weakly in my hand. Bang! There it was again. Closer this time. My pulse quickened, adrenaline surging through my veins. Whatever was making that noise, It was coming toward me. I forced myself to keep moving, my feet dragging across the floor as I searched for any sign of an exit. The room seemed endless now, stretching out in all directions, and yet I couldn't find the door I had come through. It was like the house had shifted, rearranged itself while I was trapped in the silence. Bang! Another loud crash, this time so close it made me jump. I swung the flashlight toward the sound, but the beam barely cut through the thick darkness. And then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw movement. Something shifted in the shadows, just at the edge of my vision. It was quick, almost too quick to register, but it was there. My breath caught in my throat as I turned slowly, the flashlight trembling in my hand. "Who's there?" I croaked, my voice finally breaking through the silence, though it sounded weak and hollow in the vast emptiness. No answer. Just the steady thud of my own heartbeat, pounding in my ears. I swallowed hard, taking another cautious step forward. And then, out of nowhere, the silence returned. It slammed down over me like a heavy curtain, cutting off all sound, all sensation. My ears rang with the suddenness of it, and I stumbled, disoriented. The room seemed to spin around me, and for a moment, I thought I might collapse. But then, as quickly as it had come, the silence lifted again, replaced by something far worse. A voice. But not the one that had called my name before. This one was different, deeper, filled with malice. It was right next to my ear, so close I could feel the breath on my skin. "Welcome home." The flashlight slipped from my grasp, clattering to the floor as my blood ran cold. I spun around, but there was no one there. Just darkness, stretching out endlessly in every direction. I backed away, my heart pounding so loudly in my chest it felt like it might burst. I had to get out. I had to escape before whatever was in this house decided to show itself fully. I turned and bolted toward where I thought the door might be, blindly stumbling through the darkness. The house seemed to twist and shift around me, the walls closing in, the floor beneath me creaking ominously. But I didn't care. I just kept running, desperate to find the exit, to break free from the creeping silence that seemed to follow me everywhere I went. And then, finally, I saw it. The front door. I raced toward it, my hands outstretched, my lungs burning from the effort. But just as I reached for the handle, something cold and solid wrapped around my wrist, yanking me backward. I screamed, thrashing against the unseen force, but it was too strong. It dragged me away from the door, back into the suffocating darkness. "Let me go!" I shouted, my voice echoing in the emptiness. But there was no answer. Only the silence. And then, once more, the whisper. "David." I tried to wrench my arm free, but the grip tightened, pulling me deeper into the shadows. My legs flailed as I was dragged away from the door, my hope of escape slipping further with each passing second. The air grew thick and cold, each breath turning shallow as panic flooded my system. "David." The whisper came again, closer now, like it was brushing against my ear. I spun wildly, trying to see whatever was holding me, but the darkness was too thick, too suffocating. My flashlight lay forgotten on the floor, its dim light flickering weakly. I clawed at the invisible force, my hands grasping at nothing but air. Still, the grip remained, pulling me further into the abyss of the house. Suddenly, the grip vanished. I stumbled forward, nearly collapsing onto the ground. My heart pounded in my chest as I gasped for air, the silence thick and oppressive around me. But there was no time to rest. Whatever had grabbed me was still lurking, waiting for its chance. I scrambled to my feet, my eyes darting around the room. The shadows twisted unnaturally, as if they were alive, watching my every move. The floor beneath me groaned as if the house itself was breathing, pulsing with some hidden malevolence. I had to keep moving. I couldn't stay here. I reached for the flashlight, but as my fingers closed around it, the light died completely, plunging me into absolute darkness. My heart sank. The one small comfort I had left was gone, and now I was truly blind. But then, from the corner of the room, I heard it again. A soft creak. My breath hitched to my throat. Something was there, watching me, waiting. I forced myself to move, inching backward toward what I hoped was a wall. My hands trembled as I stretched out, feeling for anything solid, anything that could give me some sense of direction. But the further I reached, the more I realized that the space around me was wrong. The walls seemed to have disappeared, replaced by an endless, empty void. David. The whisper was so close now that I could feel the breath on my neck. I froze, my entire body locking up in terror. It was behind me. Whatever had been following me, whatever had been calling my name, was right behind me. I didn't dare turn around. I couldn't. My feet felt glued to the floor, my mind racing with fear. And then, slowly, I felt it. A cold, clammy hand brushed against my shoulder. I jerked away with a scream, spinning around to face my unseen tormentor, but there was nothing there. Just the same empty darkness. My chest heaved with terror, my mind scrambling for any explanation, any way out. I couldn't stay here. If I stayed, I would die. Or worse. I turned and ran. Blindly. Desperately. My feet pounded against the creaking floorboards as I raced through the endless hallways, each step echoing back at me in the deafening silence. But no matter how fast I ran, the darkness followed. Every corner I turned, every doorway I passed, it was there, pressing in, suffocating me, whispering my name like a lover's curse. I could feel it now, the presence looming just out of sight, waiting for me to falter, to fall. And with each passing second, the distance between us grew smaller. David. The voice echoed through my mind, seeping into my thoughts, twisting them with its malice. I couldn't escape. I knew it now. This house, it wasn't just haunted. It was alive, feeding on my fear, consuming me piece by piece. But I wasn't going to let it win. Not without a fight. With renewed determination, I searched frantically for any way out, my eyes darting around the room for some hint of an exit. And then, through the haze of panic and fear, I saw it. A door. Not the front door, but something else, something small and almost hidden in the corner of the room. I didn't care where it led. I just needed to escape. I bolted toward it, my hands outstretched, fingers grazing the cold metal of the doorknob. For a brief moment, hope surged through me. Maybe this was it. Maybe I could finally get out. But as I twisted the handle and flung the door open, I realized my mistake. Behind the door, there was no escape. There was only more darkness. And in that darkness, something waited. I stumbled back, my breath catching in my throat as the shadows inside the room began to shift and move. The whispering grew louder, more insistent, echoing in my ears, in my mind. David. David. I backed away, my heart racing, as a figure began to emerge from the darkness. At first, it was just a shape, indistinct and amorphous. But then, slowly, it began to take form. A face. Pale. Hollow. eyes that gleamed with malice. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. All I could do was stare as the figure stepped closer, its eyes locked on mine, its mouth curling into a smile. "Welcome home," it whispered. The figure loomed closer, its cold eyes never leaving mine. I wanted to scream, to run, to do anything, but my body refused to obey. My legs were leaden, my breath shallow. The house seemed to have its grip on me now, and whatever was coming from the shadows, I knew it wouldn't stop until it had me. "David. David." The whisper continued, the sound twisting through the darkness, almost melodic in its horror. The figure stepped out fully from the shadows, and for the first time, I could see it clearly. It wasn't just a ghost or a spirit. It was me. A perfect, twisted reflection of myself, but its face was wrong. Where my features should have been, there was only a hollow, gaping void, as if someone had carved out the very essence of my being. "No," I gasped, stumbling backward. "This can't be real." The thing smiled, a grotesque parody of a grin, and took another step forward. Every instinct in me screamed to move, to flee, but I was rooted in place. The shadows seemed to wrap around my ankles, holding me there, forcing me to confront the horror before me. "You've always been here, David," it whispered, its voice now unmistakably my own, warped and twisted. "This place, it's a part of you." I shook my head, my mind racing to find some sense in the madness. This wasn't happening. It couldn't be. But then I felt it, something deep within me stirring, something dark, something that had been waiting. A cold, creeping sensation started in my chest, spreading through my veins like ice. The figure took another step closer, and with every inch it moved, the sensation grew stronger. "No," I whispered, my voice trembling. But it was too late. The house, the darkness, the figure, they weren't just external forces. They were a part of me, an inseparable piece of my being. And now, they were coming to claim what was theirs. I tried to move, to fight, but my body wouldn't respond. The figure was inches away now, its hollow face inches from mine. I could feel the cold radiating off it, the void where its face should be pulling me in, consuming me. And then, with one final step, it reached out and touched my chest. The world exploded into a cacophony of sound and light. My mind shattered, every thought, every memory, every part of me unraveling into the darkness. I could feel myself being pulled apart, piece by piece, as if the house, the shadows, and the figure were devouring me whole. And through it all, that voice continued, whispering in my ear, "Welcome home, David." Then, everything went silent. For a moment, there was nothing, just an endless, oppressive void. No sound, no light, no sensation. Just nothingness. And then, slowly, the world began to come back into focus. I opened my eyes, blinking against the dim light. The house was still there, the walls and floors as they had been before. But something was different. I looked down at my hands, expecting to see them shaking with fear. But they were steady. Too steady. I touched my face, my chest, trying to feel something. But there was nothing. No warmth, no heartbeat, no sense of self. I was hollow. Empty. And as I stood there, staring into the mirror on the wall, I realized with a sickening certainty what had happened. I had become the figure. The reflection staring back at me wasn't mine anymore. It was the same hollow, void-like face I had seen before. The house had taken me. The silence had consumed me. I was no longer David. I was just another part of the creeping silence. Everything around me felt distant, like a dream I couldn't wake from. The walls of the house seemed to pulse with life, breathing in sync with the heavy silence that now filled every corner. My mind raced, searching for something, anything, that could anchor me to reality. But the more I thought, the more I realized there was nothing left. I wasn't me anymore. I looked around the room, my vision sharper than before, but devoid of any emotion. The warmth that had once filled the air was gone, replaced with a cold, sterile stillness. I tried to move, but my body responded slowly, mechanically, like I was no longer in control. The silence pressed down on me, thicker than ever, wrapping itself around my thoughts. I had become part of the house now, bound to it in a way that felt permanent, eternal. A faint creak echoed through the hallway. I turned, drawn to the sound. My movements were smooth, almost unnatural, as if the house itself was guiding me. I knew what I would find at the end of that hall, but I couldn't stop myself from going. Step by step, I made my way toward the source of the noise. The floorboards groaned under my feet, each step a reminder of the creeping silence that now owned me. As I reached the doorway, I saw the figure again. Only this time, it wasn't lurking in the shadows. It stood in the center of the room, its hollow face staring directly at me. It was waiting. I hesitated for a moment, then stepped into the room. The figure tilted its head slightly, as if acknowledging me. I felt no fear, no anxiety, just an overwhelming sense of inevitability. This was my fate, and there was no escaping it. David. The voice whispered again, softer this time, more intimate. It came from everywhere and nowhere at once, filling the space between us. I didn't respond. There was no point. The figure took a step closer, its movements slow and deliberate, as though savoring the moment. I could feel the coldness radiating from it, seeping into my bones, freezing me from the inside out. I knew what was coming. Without warning, the figure reached out, its hand hovering inches from my chest. I braced myself, expecting the same soul-crushing touch from before. But this time, it didn't make contact. Instead, it paused, its head tilting again, as if considering something. For a brief, fleeting moment, I wondered if it was going to spare me. But then, in a sudden rush, everything changed. The figure's hand plunged into my chest, not physically, but deeper, as though it was reaching into my very soul. I gasped, the sensation unlike anything I had ever felt before. It was as if the core of my being was being pulled apart, unraveling in the grip of something far more powerful than I could comprehend. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. The silence was too thick, too suffocating. It filled my lungs, my throat, choking any attempt to fight back. And then, just as quickly as it began, it was over. The figure stepped back, its hollow face once again expressionless. But I knew something had changed. I could feel it inside me, like a void where my soul had once been. The creeping silence had taken the last piece of me. I was no longer just a part of the house. I was the house. The figure lingered for a moment longer, then slowly faded into the shadows, leaving me alone in the room. The silence was absolute now, an unbreakable force that pressed down on me from every angle. I stared at the door, knowing that if I stepped through it, I would never leave. This house had become my prison, my tomb, and I was its newest resident. For a long time, I stood there, unmoving, listening to the heavy stillness around me. And then, without thinking, I turned and walked back down the hallway, my footsteps echoing in the silence. As I reached the front door, I paused. The world outside seemed so distant now, so unreachable. I could almost see it, people going about their lives, unaware of the creeping silence that lurked just beyond their perception. With one final look at the door, I turned away. The house had claimed me, and now it was waiting for its next victim. Hope your dreams are filled with fear. Good night.